Call the meeting to order at 6:05. Jean, you're all set? Okay. I'm going to make just two adjustments to the agenda. We don't have a need for executive session tonight, so 7.0 is out. And 5.0 consent agenda is actually going to be an action item under copier purchase, just to answer some quick questions. Does anyone else have any adjustments to the agenda? No? Okay. Audience and communications. All right. 4.0 budget presentations, revenue and tax rates. I think actually we're going to start with, yeah.
I'm going to do a review of everything we've done up until this point, because remember 2 years ago you asked for that.
Yep.
Remember we had the meeting and people were confused about what we were doing that night because we jumped right to the revenue and tax rate. So everything you're going to hear for the first 15 slides is a review for you. That doesn't mean that you can't raise your hand and say, hey, what about that? I don't remember that, but I'm going to breeze through that. And then Jean's going to take it away, and she's going to talk about revenue and tax rate and what our budget does to the tax rate, and then what the impact of CLA and how long ago you had your home reappraised and all of that stuff, how that impacts then the tax rate. So, proposed budget FY21. I don't see anybody there. Yes, if you could, that would be great. Or I can do it if I have. Nope. Is there a little clicker there I can use?
What's that number?
I think it's 80.
I think it's 80.
So is it, oh yeah, it's not on the slide here. We can make this better. Slideshow. Yeah. There we are. So FY21 already. Budget, right? So year-round budgeting, even though like for the last 3 months, it feels like we've been on a treadmill and we're doing all this work, and you can go away from this thinking, oh, we do budget starting in October and we're done in January. The truth is that budgeting happens year-round. And it right here, it kind of like outlines what the board is doing, but in the background, the administrators, the principals, we're doing this all the time. I think I said at a recent meeting that the day after you approve this budget, or actually even now that they've already put in a budget, I'm hearing ideas about, like, you know what I'd like to think about next year? And not necessarily in terms of ads, but in terms of like switching things around. So it really truly is year-round budgeting. This year, we added the meetings that I had with the program council to share, like, how do we put a budget together in a merged district, and what kind of input do you have? That was the board's suggestion, that we get a little more input from teachers. So we've done that. We did a survey with them. So we've done some other pieces. The board budget goals, I'm not going to go over those. You know what they are. You know, they're always connected to our mission and vision. They're always connected to EQS and to the work that we're doing. And we're always with a focus that a cost the community will support. Our assumptions, salaries and negotiations. So you all know what those are based on conversations you've had at other times. The benefits piece, health insurance is up 13.2%. So that is a number that we get. We get an email some date certain in December that says, or even before, like I think in October, here's what it's going to be this year. We use the utilities and fuel forecasts. Tech center budget is up 5%. That again is a number that they give us. We don't get to negotiate it. And workers' comp is up 10%. And we're going to do a substitute rate increase. That does not have a big impact on the budget, but it will have a big impact on our schools that have a really hard time getting subs because we pay less than other people. So we're in the process of rectifying that. We thought we had rectified it last year, but everybody raised their rates. Yeah.
What are the comparables for the substitutes? Do you look at a particular, like South Burlington or something like that?
South Burlington, Essex.
Okay.
Yeah. The area right here. Proposed budget, you've seen this. Special ed was up 5.2%, general ed 4.2%, operations 4.8%. When you smush that all together, you get to 4.6%.
So these numbers would be slightly different than what you've seen before because the
as I told you before, I was doing a lot of estimates as we made a lot of changes, and so Mike Nadeau is helping us to load it all into Munis. There's some changes. The other big change is Megan and her team did a great job of meeting that go-get, not only meeting it, but they exceeded it by about $160,000. Unfortunately, we had offsets in other directions, but the total is about $2,000 higher, which is number karma.
Yeah. So this is how that looks in more detail. So this chart, the 4.6% at the bottom is the one you saw on the last slide. And then the numbers over to the right, the percentages are what percentage of that 4.6% are salaries. Salaries make up 1.5% of that. Health insurance makes up 1.3% of that. Special ed is 1.1, and then you can see district initiatives, all of that piece around STEM and early literacy and SEL, that's 0.3%. Tech center tuition 0.2, supplies books 0.2, other benefits 0.1, and debt service minus 0.1. Yes, Dave?
So I have a question when you look at this slide relative to the one before. It's, thanks, Ed. Salary and benefits said there was an increase of 1.7, but if I look at salary and health insurance here, it's an increase of 2.2.
Right, so the salary, so if you look at on this page, the salary, health insurance is all of general ed, so it includes operations and maintenance and buses and everything else. The prior slide, that's broken out.
Okay.
Does that make sense, Dave?
Yep.
Megan, you want to speak to the next two slides that are on special ed?
Sure. We talked a lot about this in more depth, but kind of the highlights are the increase that you see in that special ed budget is primarily due to cost increases. And that is due to a number of students who moved in to the district. Actually, many of them moved in last year, but weren't accounted for in the budget, so they're here right now and they'll be here next year. And that is a professional position at the high school and support staff position. That's the primary driver of that increase. We were actually down in special ed, in transportation, and outside placements, which are the other two typical cost drivers in special ed. There is a connection between being down and out placements and increase in staffing, because some of our staffing increase is related to serving kids here through the Atlas program. Yeah, you can go back one. Sorry. So that capacity building and that last bullet, the expansion of the in-house program, we are continuing to look at what we call Atlas, which is a new program to serve the needs of kids with significant social emotional learning needs. So that's the summary. These are the numbers. Increase in salary and benefits, decrease in tuition, transportation. That's special ed.
General ed budget highlights. The increases in the general ed part of the budget are related to funding literacy supports. Remember, we had this whole thing that happened where only one of our schools now qualifies for Title I, so all of the money in Title I has to go to one school. We have students in every one of our schools who would benefit from these interventions, so that is backfilling for that. It includes a placeholder for the findings and recommendations from the equity audit. It includes investments in essential arts. Remember the K-8 realignment to ensure that there's equity across all of the schools. And in doing that, that provided an opportunity to provide STEM/coding services for our schools that don't have that already. And then reconfiguration of the guidance program at Seaview to meet needs of students, and right-sizing the administrative team. You heard Adam twice in 2 different meetings came and spoke about that. Class size ratios, this is a chart you've seen before. We're well within the averages, yes.
Before you go too far.
Want me to back up?
Page slide.
Yep.
I know when we talked about early literacy and the change in Title I funds, I can't remember if I thought about this question and said it or did not, but was it a policy change or was it merely numbers that drove the way funds were allocated to different schools? Was it just a change in numbers that caused us to go over that average?
Yeah, exactly. If you're a targeted assistance school, it's the average free and reduced lunch number for the district, sets the threshold. Anybody above it gets services, anybody below it does not. There was an increase in one particular school that made the threshold so high that nobody else meets it.
Class size ratios, this year, I'm happy to say, all of the class sizes are within the ranges that the board hopes they'll be in. Essential arts, I spoke about this before, you can see that the ratio are very similar at the bottom. Class sizes at CVU, again, the average is within the range that we would want them to be. The smaller class sizes are ones that are really related to safety, and we would want smaller class sizes in tech ed and in family and consumer science. Jane, yes, okay, so go ahead. Dave, I'm gonna back up here.
The categories in the CVU class sizes?
I feel like are the core, not so much the core in ninth grade, but like mathematics, and I feel like languages are not English language arts. Like,
It doesn't.
Languages
Why-
are world languages.
that's world languages, okay. It would be nice if this slide
I think
had,
you're right, I just probably pulled one
Oh,
slide.
you pulled
Yeah.
one slide.
Yeah, I pulled slide set two.
So you do have that
Yeah.
slide from the last presentation I did in December.
okay.
I'll slide it
This is
so it's in
page 2 of that.
Yeah.
Oh,
And
okay.
the first one would be math, science.
Yeah.
It was just because there were essential arts and regular
Right.
class sizes on K to 8. It would be nice
Yeah.
to have that for
Right.
CVU as well.
We're not going to teach those next year at CVU.
We're not going to
Yeah,
teach
no.
math and
Cost
language arts.
savings, yeah.
You do have that. You have that information.
It's all personalized.
Any other questions for me before I hand the clicker over to Jean?
Yeah, I think you have to stay up there because I'm just gonna,
I'm just going to click from here.
well, I've got two, and then you have another one.
Okay, go ahead.
Jeff's got a question.
Yeah.
Going back to special education, if we can. So Megan, you were mentioning that the influx of new students from last year has had an impact on many things, but certainly on the budget. I'm wondering if, and maybe this exists already, but if, I don't have a sense of, across our district, like how many students are we talking about who are not only on 504s and or IEPs, but also are students then grouped into sort of in terms of intervention, mild, moderate, most categories, most intensive, and I'm wondering what that looks like over the span of maybe 3 years, so that we could have some sense of what our special ed population is looking at it with more specificity.
Can we go back to that slide?
So not in this presentation, but in the slide deck from the special ed presentation, there is a slide that gives you that. It's separate, now that's only for IEP students, because that's the only category that there's a quantifiable, like, we know what a mild to moderate disability is, what a severe disability is. So it doesn't give it to you for 504, but it does give you the back few years. And one of the things I highlighted when I spoke to it is we have had in some schools in particular an uptick in the severe disabilities and a downtick in the mild to moderate. And other schools within the district, it's stayed relatively stable. And then when you look at the number as a whole, it's a slight uptick in severe disabilities and consequently down on the other end. Specific to the kids that have moved into that are or I should say, the increase in staffing that you see and the students that we've had move in recently, I would say those fall into the severe disability category. So I don't know if that answers your question. That slide does exist. It's in the other packet. It's just not in this highlighted one.
And Bonnie, do we have a folder now with all of the budget?
All of the budget presentations up until tonight, which will be there later,
Yeah.
are on the budget page of the website.
So you can go
Everybody.
back and find all of these pages you're talking about.
Yep.
Colleen?
Yeah.
As long as Jeff brought that up. This slide and then the two before. So I'm thinking ahead to budget presentations in the community and the questions that are going to come my way. Let's say I go to a select board meeting and so forth. It's hard to put some of these slides into context, like I'm trying to understand the relationship between the increase in special ed, 5.2%, and yet we have changes in models. You know, 2 slides later, there's a narrative about the changes, and I'm having a hard time coming up with responses to questions I anticipate. Well, you know, for example, is CVU trying to do their own thing and it's costing more money? Is that why it's going to 5 point? And I know that that's, you know, that's a simplistic view. So I feel like I need help with understanding the changes, you know, why the 5.2%, how much of that is offset by revenue from the state or categorical funding and so forth.
Where I'm gonna go through specifically what the adds and reductions are.
Yeah,
And maybe that'll get to some part of that, maybe not all of it.
yeah,
And then we can see what else you need so that you'll feel comfortable.
okay.
And I've always thought about like offering for the board, people who are gonna be presenting to their local communities, offering for them to come in and have a round table with us to just, you know, we're not going to feed it to you. You're gonna say, well, what if somebody asks
Right.
this? And then you'll have the benefit of our wisdom to say, well, here's how
Because
that.
that's what I would say. In the special ed presentation, I did speak to,
I know.
at least
Yeah,
globally,
but
right,
small
exactly.
brain,
So it
just-
would be helpful for me to hear what questions you anticipate getting, maybe not today, this
Right.
moment, but be
Yeah.
happy to give more detail about things like that.
Yeah, because after you approve a budget at the next meeting, we still have a month and a half, right? That we can work with you on what this can look like. Okay, so now moving back to where we was.
So operations highlights, just as a reminder, really no change in the facilities, O&M area. Transportation, we have the 0.5 FTE for structure to keep things running a little more smoothly and hopefully some financial efficiencies there. Food service, the big change was moving the benefits into the general fund as the subsidy as opposed to just the overrun as a subsidy. And of course, we're doing a ton of work in the food service arena, really balancing our offerings and our cost efficiencies and making better food choices for our kids.
We made some choices last year to kind of take into account the possibility of tariffs. Are we taking into account the
The very last line there.
No, I know.
Oh.
Are we taking into account the possibility of increase in oil, gas, diesel?
No, because
we
for
locked
quite a
in?
long time, what we've done, remember we used to have the budget assumptions page when we had the baseline budget process? We implemented going to this U.S. Energy, I forget what the I is for, association, who professionally try to do projections. And, thank you. And that's where we pull them out of, and that's what we use. And if it's higher or lower, that's just a budget variance.
I just
So
wondered
unfortunately, I
if the
didn't
past 2
anticipate,
weeks,
yeah.
You know, maybe
But,
have
right,
changed
but remember,
things.
this will be a year
A
from
year from
now,
now.
so it's hard to forecast. So we just decided that's a lot easier than me trying to
Okay,
estimate oil increases.
thank you.
And then technology, of course, we're still supporting security and privacy, which is driving a lot of the work in the IT world right now, the redundant internet. And the tariff issue, we're still kind of managing on sort of back office purchases. So if we have tariffs, we'll push out some of the back office purchases, like the server may have to last 6 more months. If we don't, we buy them, so that, in case it happens later. So that's the stories on operations.
No changes in central office, same number of positions as we had last year in the very same categories. And then here's the slide that shows, here are the impacts, the personnel changes. So we reduced 1 kindergarten teacher as a result of class size in Williston. We reduced 1 para position in Shelburne as a result of class size in kindergarten, anticipated class size in kindergarten. And CVU reduced 1 non-teaching position, so that makes up the 3 FTE that are in the reductions. We added 1.5 early literacy support. That's what we just talked about a minute ago, about backfilling the Title I. We added 1.8 FTE in essential arts and that STEM category across, so that's Williston, Heinsberg, Charlotte. Shelburne already had that position. Behavior specialist, we added a behavior specialist in Heinsberg. They do not currently have a behavior specialist. They're the only school that doesn't. That is work that we're always doing, right, in terms of the intervention framework and the model that we've been working around to have a safe harbor in our schools to deal with kids who are dysregulated. We want to keep them in our school. They need to be in our school, but maybe they can't be in a classroom for maybe 20 minutes. Maybe they can't be in a classroom for math. Maybe they can't be in the classroom for half a day. But a direct connection with the classroom, but a place for them to go. This is a model that we've been working on now for 3 years. In order to move forward with that, Heinsberg did not have a behavior specialist, so that's what that one is. CVU guidance counselor, you've heard Adam speak to that a couple times, and same with the leadership team right sizing. And I will say that those two positions existed in the CVU budget 4 years ago, right? Sort of like they were starting to go down in their enrollment, and they said, maybe we can do this. Didn't really work, and their enrollment's back up. So that's what those two positions are about. Megan, I'm going to let you talk about the next two, which is a social emotional learning student support and the middle school SAP resource.
Yep, both of these are grant funded. The first is the student support program that is essentially the safe harbor program that Elaine just referenced. Some of our schools have this in place, others are building it, and some are coming in from scratch. We used to use Medicaid grant funding to pay for some of it. Now we're paying for all of it and creating a more uniform program itself in each school. That it's connected to that Heinsberg support staff position because the grant funds the professional element and that support staff is backfilling Heinsberg didn't have it. And then the middle school SAP resource, also grant funded, and that's really looking at, when we looked at our SAP resources, we had, in large part, our two largest K-8 schools had the same FTE as our two smallest schools, and that's just a capacity challenge. So this increase allows the two larger schools to have standalone positions, and then the two smaller schools would share a position. Their FTE will stay the same.
And Jean, you have bus dispatch. So we've talked about that just the very last meeting, right? Any questions about this page? Okay. I'm going to turn it over to you, Jean.
Okay. So that was the easy part. Everybody, wake up. Get to the numbers. Woo-hoo. So, the next section is in response to your question about how the grants work in to the total spending in the district. I'm going to say this is the first time we've done this, so I'm open to suggestion. If I'm not explaining something, I will try. If it's not clear, we can do better next time. It's a new adventure for us all. So this is the total district spending. I am going to point out that we report this in the annual report each year, so it is in there. So it's not super new, we've just never done it here. The other thing is, this is going to be a little confusing, so just bear with me. There is grant funding that's in the general fund. So you should recognize the top row, we just reviewed it. If you were to, you think back to when you last saw an FMR, there's grant funding that we keep in the general fund because we have people who are grant funded who we don't want to lose should the grant funding go away. So for at least a decade that I know about, the district has always chosen to take some of that money and duplicate it in the general fund. You mind if I pick on you, Megan?
Nope.
Megan is 80% funded in Idea B. If Idea B goes away, Megan does not go away. So we, we duplicate her 80% of her salary, her full salary is in the general fund. And then in the real world, so it's in the general fund, and then we back it out in the revenue, so it's a net zero, right? It's very complicated. It drives us crazy every time we try to put the FMR together to make sure we got this straight. But I'm just telling you that there is money, and I'll show you the number on the next page, how much it is, in the general fund. So in order that not double counted on this sheet, which we put in the annual report every year, we subtract out those individual people out of each of the grants. So this is like a net grant number. So what I'm telling you is that you shouldn't worry about whether or not this number is changing, because part of it is not the spending of the grant that's changing, but where we're sourcing, if we put the money in the general fund or not. I'm going to show you the whole grant in a minute, but I just wanted to explain. So here you have the total spending, though, the general fund number at the top, the grant programs net of what is double counted in the general fund. We have user fee-based programs, access here, which is 100% funding itself, thank goodness. Food service, which is mostly funding itself. And again, I've backed out the subsidy, which is in the general fund. And at the bottom, you can see the total spending.
So Jean, does the revenue for access show up under revenue?
It's completely out of, it's like the yes, it's the food, they're two both, it's just like food service. We don't show the revenue because it doesn't ever hit their general fund. The spending is not on here is, oh, so the next page too. We don't put the, we do have money in private purpose trusts. So people donate money for scholarships or student activity accounts. We don't really count that as our money. That's money that people, the soccer club, parents put money in so that they can have something. So that's not on this page, but otherwise this is district spending. So to go a little deeper on the grant spending on this page, this is the total grant spending. So if you look at, I meant to change these to the fancy I's and B's, but I didn't do that. So this is the total spending for the grants. And so this you should be able to say what's changing between 20 and 21 on this page. And you can see down here in the bottom line, well, second to the bottom line. So this is how much it totals up to. This is how much is in the general fund. And this is how much was on the other sheet. But if you looked at, you have the revenue page, probably. It looks like something like this. You can see down at the very bottom, it says revenue from grants is in there. And hopefully those numbers match, because I spent a lot of time trying to get them match. So, let's see if there's anything else I need to say on this page. One thing I just wanted, I'm sorry, then I'll get to it. One thing before I forget. The grant funding that you're going to see for FY21, you guys have to help me with this. We don't actually get our assessment from the federal government until June. So Jeff and Megan don't know how much money they're going to have. So this is really preliminary. So they get a number in June where the government says, we think we'll be able to give you $500,000 for Medicaid. We have to put together an application.
Right.
The federal government says, okay, you can have $495. So all that's going to happen until next October before all that sugars out. So if you were to compare this FY20 column to what was in the annual report from last year, it's not the same number, because it was 6 months before we actually knew what the grant was going to be. So that's why it says preliminary. That's why also we'll get better at this as time goes on, but the point in time when I say, okay, it's now the final grant number is a point in time, because you could also get, you can change your grant, right? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So they can change it through time, so. Colleen was first, I think. Right.
Just from a budgeting perspective, how close were our predictions last year to what our actual numbers were in June?
Well, I don't know if this answers your question. IDEA-B in particular is a pretty stable funding source. So unlike the fluctuations that happen in Title, that one's probably pretty close. And Medicaid is a tick less predictable because it is based on services we provide, but it's still pretty stable. So for me, those two are, they're not going to be close to the dollar amount because of just the variability, but in terms of how confident can we be in those sources, we can be pretty confident.
So can we be confident that our fiscal '21 preliminary numbers, are close to accurate for the budget?
No, I think what you need to take into account for, and this is really good just to put this in perspective, there's only two things that are important, there's only one thing that's important for the budget on this page, on this FY21 column, and that is that the people in this budget who we want to put in the general fund are the right amount of money. Otherwise, this number could double, it's not going to affect your general fund or your taxes or anything. Or if it gets cut in half, that's the problem. If it cut in half, then you have to say, well, luckily I had some of that covered in the general fund, we're okay, or oops, we have other issues, we have to do something else with the program.
So, yeah, I think it's kind of going in that vein. It seems like the Medicaid number, the preliminary number that's the biggest change. Do you have reason to believe that
So Medicaid,
that would be met?
that's a good question because I'm not sure we highlighted this. Medicaid has actually been holding a very significant, I'll call it a fund balance, that's not really what it is, but we've been carrying over Medicaid funds for a long time, and it has a hefty balance. So part of our decision to apply that particularly to the safe harbor construct is we feel comfortable that that will carry us for several years, so we don't feel like we're in a cliff situation. And the restrictions around using that money is you are not supposed to use it to fund something that you paid for in your budget the year before. So in order for us to use those funds, we also have to be creating something new. In our case, what we're doing is expanding a promising practice, which will check the box of non-supplanting. So that's why Medicaid looks that way. It's not actually that we got more money, it's that we've been holding on. We've been conservatively spending our Medicaid, very conservatively spending it, and we have the opportunity to use some of that.
So if I can say a little bit differently, so if you have an assessment, you apply for it, they say, yes, you can have this $500,000, and you only spend $300,000,
Right.
they don't come and take it back.
Correct.
So we have over the years built up.
Yep.
And so, if this promising practice turns out to be really great, how do you fund it? It's not new the following year, right?
No, but
Oh,
you
yes,
can
it is.
continue it. You can continue using
Okay.
Medicaid for it.
They don't
Yes.
say
It's
all
sort of
gotta
like
be
the
new.
minute you stop paying for it, then you can't go back later and pay for it. We do that with SAPs. Because it's a new position, we can use a grant to pay for the new position. The minute we stop doing that, we can't then go back. So that's why we feel comfortable that it's a stable funding source for the foreseeable future for that part of the budget.
And part of the tension sometimes, stink eye, that I'll have with these two is like, you're putting it in now, or are you just creating a liability for me, right, when this goes away? And so some things like safe harbor, the argument, I think, if I'm saying this correctly, is that if we are successful at safe harbor, we may not have to send kids out.
Right.
And so if we're not successful at safe harbor, then we dismantle safe harbor, right?
Yeah.
But that's, so that's sort of but if it's just like, let's start building things, and then when the money runs out, we stick it in the general fund,
Right.
that's when we have hard conversations about whether that's appropriate. Sometimes we do. Sometimes the answer is yes, and we got to figure out a way to get it into the general fund. Something's going to have to come out,
Right.
but not always. So I have details on these, which I am happy to.
Well, my questions were parallel to what Brendan and Angela already discussed. It's more along the lines of, what's the total liability? Years ago, we used to, and we haven't done it in a very, very long time, we used to give everyone who was on Title II teacher a pink slip in June or whenever, May, riff them and then rehire them, and did that on a regular basis. And that practice hasn't been done in years because it doesn't make sense for HR purposes, people feeling good about their positions. But my bigger question, and I think this is a communications piece perhaps, Bonnie, that you could help us with, is what's the long-term planning that happens with the grants? How many of these are multi-year grants that we have confidence in? So, that liability question, I guess that's it.
I think I would say, and correct me if I'm wrong, I would say that of the federal grants, we've gotten to a point where we're pretty comfortable that the amount is not at risk. A couple of years back, which is why they started putting money in the general fund, is because things were looking risky. And so that's why they started saying, well, we better make sure we get some of that in general fund anyway. That one, at this point, it doesn't look like IDB or Medicaid is going away. So they're pretty comfortable that the amount of funding we have now. And then how about title?
Yeah, it was the federal budget that passed just about a month and a half ago. They actually increased some of the title spending on 1 and 2, which was encouraging because when the new administration came in, Title II was on the chopping block, and that's one of the reasons why we have so much this year. I was saving for a rainy day in case that happened.
Yes, so some of it's connected to the reauthorization of the Elementary
Correct.
Secondary Education Act, which goes up
Correct.
every, it's 8 years
Yep.
on average.
Yep.
So some of these might be stable for
Mhm.
8 years, but some of them might be stable for 3 years
Yep.
at a time.
But what Jeff is saying is that in this new budget reconciliation that they just did, Title I and Title II saw pretty big
It's still there.
increases,
Yep.
much bigger than anybody. We thought we could get cuts and there were increases that we needed to cut. It doesn't change what our dilemma is about, we can only spend Title I money for Title I students in one of our schools.
Right.
So that's a whole other conversation.
Yep.
Now, the one that does come to mind as not as stable is down here in prevention grants. These used to be called CY, all the CY grants. Over the years, that number has eroded significantly, and I don't know, 5 years ago maybe, the district took a pretty hard look at, we have to match that up. You know, if you hired somebody to pay for the grant, when the grant goes away, the person goes away. Or you say that work is really important and should be in the general fund. So Christina's worked very hard. At this point, all of the prevention folks, except for the new SAP, are in the general fund. And so if the revenue goes up or down, it's a revenue problem. And this number here is, it's pretty conservative. In fact, that usually, in fact, I think this year already, she knows she's higher than the 122.
Yep.
This 122 number, it's a conservative number, it's what I know because most of these grants are not 1 year, they're several years. So she's like, these are the ones I know I have. But if I don't know I have it, it doesn't go on the revenue for the next budget. But then it shows up and she gets it, or she gets another grant, she's really good at writing grants. So she beats that number every year, but this is, just because it's been an issue, this is a really conservative one. The two things were, if it's important, super important to the school, it's in the general fund. If it's grant funded, I think the Burlington one.
Yes. Well, right, so one of the things we did in the last couple of years is the positions that we know are required to do our work, our SAPs and mentoring, those are part of our comprehensive student support system. Those are the ones that are in the general fund. A position that sunsetted, or a grant that sunsetted, that is not a word, I apologize for that, had a position associated with it, and when the grant went away, the position went away. We did just receive, through our partnership with Burlington, a grant that will likely result in a position. And unlike in years past, that position is very clearly, from the beginning, going to be a position that will go away when that grant goes away. So there won't be a sort of coming back to the board and saying, oh, we lost the grant, we need that money, for positions that are associated with a specific grant.
So with the equity audit, or not the equity audit, the literacy audit, there's grant funding for the literacy coordinator.
Yes.
Is that
That is-
will be under discussion? Does it then become part of the general fund, or when the funding goes
Right.
away?
Exactly,
That
and
would
that
be-
one is covered by IDEA-B, but a certain slice of IDEA-B, there's a small percentage of IDEA-B that I can spend on non-special ed. You spend it in support of prevention activities, which is what we're using, that can sustain itself for the next couple of years, and then we will be having a conversation about what do we need then.
But when we have the conversation, we also have the internal conversation about all the grants that we manage.
Right.
And it may be shifting funding grant sources rather than coming to general ed.
Can you just quickly remind us of the grant partnership with Burlington? Because I think that's a good talking point.
Yes.
That we reach out and we collaborate.
Yep, and I'm not gonna do it justice, because Christine's not here, but,
No, I just,
yeah, for the past couple of years, we've been partnering with, it's Burlington and it is one other prevention coalition, and I can't remember which one. if anyone has seen the Parent In website that we have, that's one activity that's part of the grant. It's essentially a community and parent education grant around prevention, around developmental assets, and what do we need to do to support kids. We partnered with Burlington to have a position associated with it, created parent trainings, the website, and a number of other things. And I agree with you, Colleen, it's a great talking point, a great program. And in fact, when Burlington wrote this new grant, they got funded for significantly more based on the good work that they had done before. So it's good.
So I have some detail on the bigger grants, which I will turn over to
Yep.
Megan and Jeff.
So Medicaid, there's two parts of Medicaid. The first one is the big amount of Medicaid, and this is reimbursement that we draw down because we provide services to students by professionals who are considered medical providers. A lot of this is kids who receive significant support in special ed. We bill Medicaid for those services, we get money back, and later we use that money in the form of prevention. It doesn't come back to offset the service we provide, it comes back for us to use towards prevention. So this is the grant that, this is what it covers. Social workers, it has covered for the past year, that's not new. Centerpoint contract for clinical hours, this is for actual counseling that happens at CVU, that has been funded by Medicaid for the past 2 years, I think, so not necessarily new. The behavior systems coach is, we're in the first year of it this year, so next year. District lead nurse, this is a position, this is an amount of money that we had contemplated being used for district nurse leadership. Decided that that wasn't the model that was right at the moment, so that is not being used next year. That safe harbor structures that I talked about during that presentation, that is funding existing positions in some schools, and for the schools for whom there's an additional half-time professional position just to right size. But by and large, every school has these positions, they're growing these programs, we're using this funding for it. The SAP counselor. And then we always have used a portion of Medicaid to pay for the portion of the special ed administrative assistants who do the clerical work in order to draw that money down. So that's what that 67,000 is, and that just that varies based on, it's a percentage of their salary. EPSDT, which is actually now called MAC, Medicaid Administrative Claiming, is another pot of money we draw down because of services we provide. It's a much smaller amount of money. And that, over the past couple of years, we've folded into prevention. So Christine oversees that grant. We used to kind of carve it up, and each school sometimes got a very small amount of money and spent it, but it's much more efficient to be able to spend the chunk of money. So Christine and her team oversees that.
And I think I put the SAP counselor in the wrong one, it should be in prevention, right? So I should move it.
Yes. Well, that's right, we talked about that today.
Yeah. I couldn't change it because it would just screw up too many numbers.
That's
but
right.
I will fix it before the book's closed.
IDB, that's the grant that is an allocation for special education, has a lot of restrictions on the bulk of the funding. It can't be used, except for a small slice of it, it can't be used for non-special education services. So we use it to fund our community skills program at the high school in its entirety, which is a transition program for high school students with disabilities to get them out in the community, get them jobs. We fund our consultation team, which is Jen Randall, who is an intensive needs special educator, and then portions of FTEs of the rest of the people on that team, and that's an expert team that comes in and works with school-based teams for kids with specific needs. Atlas is the program that is being piloted this year. We have a 1.0 special educator and a 0.5 clinician, and that program mimics the Howard Inclusion Program. This grant funds the professionals associated with it. It funds 1.5 of them this year. Next year, we're going to expand the clinical portion so that there will be 2.0. FTE so that we can serve more kids. The support staff that work under those professionals, those fall in the special ed budget because those services are required for kids' IEPs. Administration is myself and a portion of my
A bunch
admin
of other
assistant
people.
and some other people, yep. Proportionate share is an amount we are required to set aside in the grant to provide services for students who are parentally placed in private schools within our district and on IEPs. I'm happy to answer questions about that. We don't have a lot of control over that, but we have to set aside and spend that amount of money. And then this coordinated early intervening services is that portion of my grant. I'm allowed to spend 15% of it on services to prevent disabilities, and that's what can cover kids who are not on IEPs. We last year paid for the literacy audit with it, and this year we are paying for Jen Sabushi, our literacy leader. And I also use a small part of it to pilot something called Education Modified, which is a software program that adds on to Jump Rope and has a lot of supports for teachers in terms of modifying things for kids. We are piloting it. We don't know if we'll continue it. We'll know more at the end of the year. Yep.
Quick question. The proportionate share, 61,000, you said it's required. Is that number based on track record, or is it a proportion of total special ed budget, or how's that?
Good question. Every December 1st, which is when we submit child count, which is the number of students on IEPs in our district, when we submit it, we have a number of kids that we know of, and then we find more later, but we have a number of kids, because we have a big pot of money here because we have Lake Champlain Waldorf School, we have Vermont Day School, we have the Bellwether School, we have Waldorf High School. We have a number of private schools in our district, and we serve the kids there even if they live outside of our district. For example, South Burlington does the same with any private school that's in their district. So they take that.
I'm confused. I'm sorry. So the private schools there's a relationship between Champlain Valley School District and these private schools, just because they're within the geographical boundary of CVSD, and our district is a fiscal agent, or?
No, we don't serve the school. We're not allowed to serve the school. But we have to partner with the school to be able to find the kids. So our responsibility is, if I am a student on an IEP and my parents have chosen to enroll me in the Lake Champlain Waldorf School, I'm still entitled to be evaluated every 3 years and to receive a portion of this proportionate share. And it goes directly to the student, not the school. Most of this is spent in the form of contracts to tutors, speech pathologists, literacy and math instruction. That's the bulk of it. And we're legally required to do it, and it's a calculation that the state gives us based on that number of kids that we have as of December 1st. Yep.
Jeff's turn.
Yes, I'll just go through the titles pretty quickly. We talked a lot about Title I. We currently have 4.0 FTE teachers. Last year we had 5, and we were anticipating having lost a school, having the pie shrink. It turns out it didn't shrink, so that might actually be increased for the Heinsberg School next year. We also use it for materials training and parent involvement. You have to use at least 1% for parent involvement, so we have a number of activities we address there too. Title IIA is really about professional development, and so we use it to support 2.0 in district instructional coaches who work in our schools. Mentor coordinators, actually, there's a mistake there I should have caught. There is no FTE there, it's just 2 stipends. We have a very robust mentor program per state law. We have veteran teachers who have been trained to be mentors, paired with new teachers for 1 or 2 year relationships, depending on the experience level. And we have 2 people who coordinate all of that, and that's only about 7,000 of this big total. And then the rest of it's used for a number of conferences that we send a lot of our people to. An example is we've got this group of administrators, 10 of us, who are doing Courageous Conversations, which is diversity training, a leadership program, and Title II is funding that experience.
I think the 1.5 should have been on the bullet.
I think that's probably right, yeah. Title III is English language learners. It's almost entirely dedicated to 2 summer programs, one in Shelburne and one in Williston that we run. It's really highly successful. We've got great data that shows the students who engage in these programs see less slippage throughout the summer, some really nice data to support that. And also the feds require that you also dedicate some money for professional development and parent involvement. And so we use the professional development money for our ELL teachers. We've got 6.0 FTE there. Those are general ed funded people, but the professional development is grant funded for them. And then Title IV is a relatively new grant. It's about 3 years old. And there's 3 categories. You have to spend at least 20% of it on what's called well-rounded education. We are currently using it to support 0.6 FTE in the Sustainability Hub here at CVU. At least 20% has to be spent on safe and healthy schools. We are using it in a number of ways, but one of those ways is to fund a program in the summer for students who struggle with engagement called Shader Croft. And finally, you have to use a little bit of it for technology, and we're using that to be part of a consortium that is building proficiency-based transcripts in our next, some of our next big steps in proficiency-based learning. And most of these commitments I anticipate continuing for a while.
Thank you for including this. I've been going to board meetings since 2001, when Bob used to hand us a 45-page document with every single line item. And even with that, I don't think I ever understood all the grants and the impact that it has on our system. So this was really helpful. Thank you.
Count it as a success.
Yeah.
Thanks. All right. On to the main part of the show. The whole thing on the agenda. Besides the presentation, you should all have a revenue and expense sheet that looks like this. So that's the detail behind what can fit on here. It's about too small. So we're going to talk about revenue, which you haven't seen before. This is it should look familiar though, because it's which is being made each month or each quarter. This is sort of bigger chunks, but so starting at the top, the fund balance application, that's the amount of the fund balance that we are applying to revenue. I have left it flat at $500,000 year to year. We may be having a conversation about that in a few more minutes. So the next chunk is what most of us would call local revenue. It's actually within the district. Big pieces of the local revenue, if you're looking at the detail here, is the impact fees, which Williston is still collecting for CVU. Since they keep building, the number keeps going up. So we're again, it's a fund and we pull it down. So we do have to use up that money to coincide with paying off the bond in 2024. So we try to take enough so that it, is a nice sloping revenue number that will end with the bond. The tuition here is incoming, so it's towns that send their kids to our schools and pay us because they don't have a school, or they're usually because they don't have a school. We have some parents who pay for tuition into our programs, but we don't count that because I'm not really sure I can always count on them to come back next year. So to be conservative, we just do the one where a Grand Isle kid where there's no high school is coming to CVU. We count that because we're pretty sure they'll come back, but not the parent ones. Interest, that number is, Laura Nassau does an awesome job. This is our TAN borrowing, where we tax anticipation notes. It costs us to borrow, but we borrow, say, $6 million on July 1st, and then we draw it down as the cash flow doesn't really match with the incoming tax receipts, and then it goes back up. So we have the $6 million in the bank. She's found a really nice deal that makes us a lot of interest, so way to go, Laura. The rental is, yeah.
Do we really expect that number to go up based on real
information that we have, or is that trying to predict a direction of interest rates? Because interest rates have been going down.
This is actually less than what we're gonna get this year. So we looked at the contracts we have with the bank this year, and we took it down. So I think it's 275 or 280 or something, so it's higher. Let's see, the rental is the building usage fees, that's going down, and we all went through that ad nauseum not that long ago, but this is one of the unintended consequences on the other side of consolidation, is that in consolidating our rules around building usage, we had to forego some revenue in towns that were paying more than others. So that's what I would call local revenue. On lots of charts, you're gonna see local revenue also includes state revenue. They're someone else's forms, not mine, but in my form, state's revenue is different. Special education, we've updated that to sync up with the new round 3 spending for special ed. Transportation sort of based on what we're actually getting this year. Rest are small. Then you can see the grant revenue applied to budget. If all went well on Sunday, these numbers match the prior slides. But this is like I said, we put it in the expense, we put it in the revenue, and they net out so that there's no impact on the tax, right? We say, well, we're gonna spend this money, we're gonna get it in revenue, so it's like, it could be 0, it could be $10 million, it's not gonna affect that tax number because I subtract them. And then in the real world, the expenses don't hit here at all. But anyways, this number should match the other sheet. And that, when you subtract all those things from your total spending, you get the state education spending grant, which is net ed spending on the tax returns. So any questions? This is really what I have for revenue. Yeah, Russ?
You may have already covered this, and so I apologize if I missed it, but the fund balance, assuming we apply the full 500 budgeted for the current fiscal year,
Yep.
where would we end, where would we end the current fiscal year?
So right now, we have $2.5 million of fund balance that can be applied. That number is higher than when we started this in November, because we just, because of the audit work we've been doing, is how to scrubbing through some of the numbers now that we really understand them. So as you know, the tricky part with this, I know you know this, Russ, but, and I don't have the multi-year one, or it's easier to see on that, but whatever you apply here in revenue, if you took that 500 to 0, it's giving you a $500,000 hole, and you have to make it up in taxes. So sort of the whole trick has always been, how do you take that $2.5 million, and we're supposed to keep about $1 million. $1 million is what the auditors think is a reasonable number for emergencies. So we have, how do you take that 2.5 minus 1, so $1.5 million, and take it down in sort of an orderly manner that you can manage in your taxes? I know you've done this a million times, but that's the risk of increasing that number, is being able to take it down in an orderly fashion. When I thought we only had $2 million, I thought the 500 was a good number. You know, that means you have $1 million, you spend 5, 3, 2, 0, good number. Now that we have a little more, discussion.
We're gonna talk about this
Right.
maybe after we go through the,
Right.
all the tax rate. If the board wants to entertain changing that number.
What I thought Russ was asking was roughly, what's the difference between your budgeted cost for the current year versus your actual cost for the current
Oh, you
year?
mean for FY this year?
Well, I mean,
Yeah.
that'll,
I
not
know-
exactly, but that'll affect what the fund balance is at the end of this year.
Yeah.
You know,
Oh, I see.
that's always gonna be kind of a moving target until you get to the end, but I think you covered it in that, you know, there's basically $2.5 million there, give or take. We're proposing to spend another $500,000 of that next year, and then I guess the question is can we bump it? You know, should we bump it to buy the tax rate down, and what would another $250,000 or you know, whatever number committed to the fund balance, from the fund balance, do as far as the tax rate's concerned?
And to your point, Dave, I tried to get the second quarter FMR done, and right now, I would not be able to commit that there's going to be extra money at the end of the year. I have a lot of this, but it's kind of a guess at this point. But,
Okay.
Yeah, so we may or may not spend the 500 budgeted this year.
Well, that's all I have in revenue. Yeah, go ahead, Colleen.
Simple question, what is, under the local revenue, what's
Yep.
high school completion?
You know, I
$5,000?
saw this, someone's going to ask me what high school completion is.
I feel like I should know.
I feel like
And
I
I
should
have
know
no
too, and I
idea.
really don't. I will have to get back to you.
Where is that?
It's right above the state
right here.
revenue. I
$5,000.
suspect it has
And
something
it's-
to do with kids who don't complete in the regular, you know, that we have to support, maybe when they're 19.
But it's revenue.
Special tutoring or something.
So they
for
pay
these
us.
classes.
That doesn't make
No,
sense.
it could be that, Jeff, see if this sounds right. It could be those students that complete high school in a different way, and we support the process. We might get some money for doing that. Every once in a while, I will get like a portfolio that I need to go through, then it goes to the high school. I don't know if you ever went through this when you were principal, but it could be that that's what that's for. That gives us money for doing that work.
That comes from the state.
Yes.
Comes from
it's
the
part of
state.
revenue. Yeah. That's funny, Colleen. You know, I looked at it and it was like,
Yeah.
Mark's like, we gotta go. It's like, state revenue, no one will ask me, it's $5,000.
Yeah, no, I think that is what it is. I just don't know how it all works.
I've probably asked before, Bob, what is that?
Yeah.
I just don't remember.
Fund was always too small before we could see it.
He's like,
That was a strategy.
it was probably in the CVU budget, which is probably why I asked.
Right.
All right. So we are on to tax rates. This has only been tweaked since the one I sort of showed you a preview of in December, because like I said, as we added the real numbers. So, want me to walk through it again? You guys sit here. Angela, you want to do it?
My brain has gone somewhere else.
I think it would be good to review it again.
Okay. So hopefully you recognize the end spending, the total spending number here, which is a 4.6% increase on spending. This is the local revenue with the $500,000 fund balance application from the sheet I just showed you a second ago. And if you subtract them, this is the net ed spending. And that's what the tax rate is going to be keyed off of, net ed spending. That is also 4.6%. Then you take that number, the 69 million, and you divide it by our equalized pupil count. You got your calculators out. Hopefully it's that number, 16,681, which is a 3.8% increase from the prior year's net ed spending. So, everybody with me? Okay. And remember, just the equalized pupil count is the prior 2 years average, and it's the equalized pupil count, so it's weighted for all sorts of different factors. So it's not, we don't have 4,176 kids, we have Bonnie.
3,927.
Lynn and I were in a meeting today, and the architect said, how many kids in the school? And I said 4,000, and she said 3,900, and she knew exactly the number. It's like, that's why we work well together, 4,000. But this is the weighted number. So, so you get down to this number here. To turn that into taxes, if you remember, we touched briefly on the Vermont Tax Commissioner's letter. They do this, he does this calculation, and he comes up with a number called the yield, which is what $1 on the, roughly, vague, you know, a big picture, $1 on the property tax rate, how much per pupil spending that would support, $1. It's not supposed to be a target, it's not an average, it's just $1 on the property tax rate. Now, you guys all know that we raise money for schools in a lot more ways than just property tax. This just happens to be how the property tax is calculated. So if $1 gets you 10,883, and we need 16,681, if you divide them, it's 1.53. It's 153% of that number, which is the $1.53. That number is, you know, that's, so essentially that's a $1.53 on the tax rate, right? So it's a 1.6% increase. Then just to make things easy, we do get to subtract the incentive. Remember, it was started at 10 cents, 8 cents, 6 cents, we're at 4 cents this year. So instead of $1.53, it's now $1.49. So that is the equalized tax rate that this budget supports. Reminder, just put footnotes, so I remind people that yield will change. It's a legislative number. The legislature will figure it out well after we vote. But we've always used the tax commissioner's number. So what else are you going to use? You guys are getting good at this. Okay. Bonnie and I are working on how to make this chart prettier. But there was a question about like what's our tax rate been doing since consolidation. So this is FY 18, which was the first year of consolidation. So you can see that this is before we take the incentive out, because the incentive has got this built-in increase. So before you take, so this is the $1.54 that I just showed you. Is that right? It's $1.53. It should be $1.53. And these are the other, so this should be the pre. Equalized tax rate. Yes, the equalized tax rate, yeah. So I think you're right, this is a typo, it should be 53. But this is, it just shows that the before you get mixed up with CLA and the incentive, the tax rate has been flat. Board's done a lot of yeoman's work to keep that flat, and also we were seeing a lot of consolidation savings early on. Barbara had a question for that, I'm going to go back to the second. So we're working to make this chart before it goes more public than now. It's going to be exact, but over there are the pre-CLA 2017 tax rates. Colleen Heinsberg had a reappraisal for that number. I'm not really sure how to best show it, but otherwise those were the pre-CLA tax rates before consolidation.
Yeah, people, I don't know. I think CLA, I think a lot of people can understand it when they understand what reappraisal means.
Yep.
So I just want to be clear, this is an equalized tax rate that does not include the incentive, is that?
Correct.
Okay.
So in this year, the tax rate was $1.42.
Are you talking the lines or the numbers?
So the light
There's
blue
two
line
lines.
would show
There's two
you
lines.
with and without incentive.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So the dark blue line would be without incentive.
Okay.
And the light blue
I
line
wasn't
is-
following the key.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
That's pretty good.
It's amazing. When I looked at it, I was impressed, but it does get confusing because there's so many tax rates to look at.
Well, you know what would be helpful also is to have a parallel chart that shows the enrollment, because the enrollment has been fairly flat.
Flat as well.
And people are hearing across the state enrollment going down. And so side by side, same year span, I think that would be helpful.
That's a good idea. Okay, I touched briefly on the tax commissioner's letter. So December 1st, or I think it was 3rd this year, the tax commissioner sends out all of in order to develop the yield, he explains his assumptions. And in the assumptions on that yield development was the growth in ed spending, and basically the AOE, the finance department, the AOE calls up all the business managers and say, what's it look like, right? And so I tell them 4.6%. So we hadn't done the equalized pupil at that point. Everybody else tells them everything. They come up with something and say to the tax commissioner, we expect education spending to go up by, when they added it all up, it was 5.01%. So that's what is in that yield calculation, is an assumption of growth in ed spending of 5%. So we're below that at 4.6. There's another assumption in there because they're trying to come up with this equalized pupil count number. So they have to go through and add up all of do an assumption on the growth in kiddos that are going to our schools. And statewide, it's a loss of 0.5% on kids. And we are just about 1% up kids. So again, not trending with the state, good for us. So in the yield calculations, the growth in spending per EP, the state is saying, the whole state, it looks like it's going to be 5.53%. And that's the 3.8 that we're at. Yep, Brendan.
This is just on question of interest, but one of the things we talked a lot about during the finance committee was you know, we're being told by Williston and by different towns that we're not gonna see more kids because of the growth in the construction. Obviously, you know, we had a positive change. Be interesting to see what that's like by town. Obviously, it's not part of the budgeting process, but just down the road.
We have that, don't we?
Yeah, we have that.
We do.
I think it would be nice to have this as some kind of graph visual as well. I feel like having 3 visuals that show that we basically had a flat tax rate increase, that we've had a
Stable
growth of
enrollment.
1% or something, and then just showing where we're compared with the rest of the state. I just think when we're presenting it to our towns, that kind of visual, that you know,
That's a
you're really
great
putting
idea.
it one after, like
Three,
one next to
three
another.
lines in each table.
Or something, yeah, just, I think that just really shows that we're as a
Responsible.
district, we're trying our hardest to
Yeah.
be responsible.
Well, I think that's one thing that is really difficult or a struggle for you guys to communicate is that your constituents are all getting bombarded with statewide
Right.
trends, which don't necessarily
So if
tie.
we could compare ourselves to the state, so this is a good chart. I think it's a good chart, but I think if we could have it more visual.
And
And if
more
it would be, like, right next-
explanation.
right
like
next to each
EP
other.
means equalized pupil, or,
Did you do something else on that, Elaine? Because I know you had. The other, you know what, Barbara, you had asked me the question in an email, which I didn't get to today, but I can't remember, I think the commissioners, no, it wasn't the tax commissioner, he just published his letter. The governor said, wouldn't it be great, we could keep this flat if everybody came in at 1.7%. And I should have looked up that number, it was under 2. But if you look way at the very beginning, back at the very beginning of this chart, we can't possibly do that without cutting program because of salary benefit assumptions.
It's good enough to include it there.
Yeah, and it wasn't, and you know what, I do have to say, like, unlike last year, and I know Russ and I had conversations about this, like, last year at this time, but was it last year when the governor really was like, everybody should do this? And I haven't heard that. I haven't heard peep since this letter that was attached to the tax commissioner's letter, so I don't know if something will come out later. I'd like to think that, you know, the governor's a smart man. I think he figured out that year when he came out with a target after everybody had already printed their warnings that, you know, if he wants to influence budget, it's got to be sooner. So he may come out. I'd be a little surprised since we haven't heard anything. I don't know if anything happened today. Wasn't today?
It is an election.
Yes. So I have high hopes for the yield getting even better. Yeah, it was opening. Doesn't session open today? Yeah. Okay. So maybe on Thursday I have to eat all my words. We'll see. Okay. All that happy news, this is the not so good news, because the last piece of the pie.
Actually, the number you were looking for, it was actually part of the tax commissioner's letter. It was if districts could restrain budget growth to about 1.4% cumulatively, 1.9% per pupil. I hate it when they don't tell us. Is that equalized per pupil? Is that?
It's always.
What is it? Average statewide rates could stay the same as the current year.
Thanks. So I was wrong on the source and the number, but thanks for having that handy. Yeah, I'm pretty sure. So we had a benefit this year because the statewide yield got better, which lowered our numbers. The reason it got better, according to the letter, which I do remember this, Lynn, is that property values are rising around the state. That's exactly what the CLA is. So the CLA is the common level of appraisal. It's a way since it's a statewide tax rate, the state says you will pay X per 100 or 1,000 of your property value. They have to have a way to make sure that the way that we're assuming property value in Shelburne is the same as in Montpelier. And so they have a very complicated system where they go out and they look at recent sales and is your appraisal, is your town appraised at market value? That's essentially what the CLA does, is it says if you're not, based on the data we have, we're going to adjust your numbers. And that's what the CLA does, is adjust it so that everybody, as best they can manage, is at market value. It's not a perfect system. You're going to see the St. George numbers here is astronomical. I exchanged a couple emails with the clerk. They're looking at that to see if there's a way they can challenge that number to a better number, because it's very, especially in smaller towns, it can be very dependent on one or two property sales that might really be anomalies. So they're gonna go back and see if they can change their number, but everybody else is pretty consistently, you see here, this was the CLA, the amount that 100% would mean you're exactly at market value. This would say that Charlotte's appraised values are 97.66% of market value. That's what it was last year, and you can see it's, now their property values have gone up, the appraisal has not changed, so there's a bigger gap. So it's about 2 points for everybody except St. George.
I'm wondering if it would be helpful to have year of last appraisal
That's a pretty good idea.
included in this chart.
Yeah. Yeah.
Shelburne's was 2008.
Really?
Yeah, that's why.
So rough, just about.
Wow.
Town of Shelburne website says there's going to be a town-wide reappraisal in 2023. So what Dave and I weren't sure of is, what's the state law that says, you know, if your CLA hits X, you've got to reappraise? Or is there something that, you know, if it hasn't been done in a certain number of years, then it's going to get done? Do you know what those?
I know that I know that at least as far as education spending is concerned, is if you get off a certain amount, you have to reappraise. I don't know if there's some other statute that says so many years.
Yeah.
And I don't know the number.
'Cause I don't think that, you know, I don't think any of the towns here are, you know, we came up with 80 as the CLA number that maybe triggered it, but not sure about that.
Right.
But I don't know that any of the towns are triggering it by the CLA number, but yet Shelburne seems, you know, about to go ahead with this for 2023, and I guess, is Heinsberg doing it now, or?
We
I
just
just
did
did
ours.
it a couple of years ago.
That's
Okay.
why theirs is so high.
And was your CLA off by a certain number, or had it just
You know,
not been done?
I think when it was getting close to 90, that kind of triggered something, if I recall.
Okay.
I mean, just people in the town thought it was time, because it costs money to do it.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And, yeah.
Yeah, no, they're not doing it just for grins, I mean, they're.
I mean, in the
so-
pie,
something's-
you know, when there are town expenses, the pie gets cut in so many pieces, and it's not like people are paying more or less. It's just hard when you're trying to talk about education
Right.
spending if you're not close to the 100%.
Mhm.
But if,
The
you know,
people
if
in
one
the town,
town's 80%,
the
doesn't
town
matter.
budget, the town is raising the same amount of money, so if your appraisal goes up, your rate goes
Yeah.
down. But statewide, it's a rate, so that's, yeah, it will change. But that's what's hard to explain to people. And also, this gets applied to every property. And if you're, say you're, I know Charlotte sometimes has this problem, if the lake properties had 3 sales and they were astronomical, it affects everybody's properties, even though the properties inland are not seeing a change. And so that's the kind of thing that the town will go and sometimes have a discussion with the state about whether or not it's fair. I know Williston, 2 years ago, was successful in fighting it because they took Maple Tree Place sold, that whole corner of Taft's Corners sold, and that they applied that same rate to all the houses in Williston, and it was, you know, they convinced the state that it was not a fair number to throw into the calculations, and they won that battle. Didn't win last year, though, but the 2 years ago they won, so. So there are things to do, but I mean, but I think, to wrap this back around, is that we try really hard to keep. The reason I'm showing you this is because it's going to be really important to your constituents, but you have no effect on the number to the right of the CLA. That's because people's properties are getting more valuable. So it's a, Colleen, you can say this better than I do, but it's a tricky slope if you start trying to take credit for the property values or whatever. Yeah. That's really what I have.
So I'm just curious, is there a way to, like, let's look at Shelburne at 92.66%, meaning their property values are at 92. Is there a way, a formula that would tell us what the tax rate would be if they were at 100%?
That's the equalized tax rate.
It would be the equalized tax, it's not.
Yeah, it's just this number times that
Oh,
number, divided by
okay.
that number.
Yeah,
it's-
okay.
it's this
Because I
number
think
divided
that's,
by that
that's a fundamental concept there.
Equalized tax rate, we need to.
Yeah,
Right.
and we need it at the front end, and we need it afterwards to say, if you were at 100%, this is what
it
you'd
would
be paying.
And
That's
this is-
really,
And this is how you can compare
right,
Shelburne to Montpelier or whatever.
right.
Because if another, you know, Wilmington, Vermont is 136 in their
Right.
equalized tax rate. They're not spending as much on their kids
Yeah.
as we are.
That said, there are gonna be a lot of people who are gonna say, last year, my taxes didn't increase. This year, I'm looking at an 8-cent tax increase.
Budget,
And,
equalized tax rate. and budget.
hold on, let me finish. And the school district is holding on to $2.5 million of money that was raised that hasn't been spent. And technically, that is not really our money, that's the community's money, right? Fund balance, we used to have to get permission. We still
do.
have to
Oh,
get
yeah.
permission
Yeah, we got.
to spend that money, because it is the town's money. I think that, I would like to throw out there for the board to consider that we look at using some of our fund balance. We don't need $2.5 million in fund balance. To put that, to reduce the tax rate, I think 400,000
400,000
is a
in
penny.
either reduced spending or more revenue is a penny on the tax rate.
And what that does is brings us to the same equalized tax rate as when we began consolidation. So essentially over 4 years. Now, the problem with taking all $400,000 out of ed fund, or out of, I have too many funds, no, it's not the slush fund, out of the fund balance, is that it does put you in a hole for next year. But I think that we could take at least $250,000 out of our fund balance and apply it, and ask the administration, we have a lot of time to find $150,000 to make up somewhere, to give us the penny tax decrease.
Also, one of the things that we have to think about is the next 3 to 5 years with the fund balance. Because right now, 2 years ago, I think we had a conversation of how are we going to step this down. Originally, it was 500,000, 500,000, 500,000, 250, 250, and then that brings us to the 100,000 or the 1 million target that we want to be at. So if we go to if we take 750 out this year versus the 500, we're going to take 750 out this year, 500, 250, and then in fiscal 24 there'll be 0. So the step down is going to be not as spread out as we originally wanted it to be. So it's one of those things. It's kind of, it'd be great to do that right now, take out 750, but will our community see a bigger impact in fiscal 24?
I'm sorry, so if we took out $400,000, what is it affecting? I'm sorry, it was a penny off of what?
The tax
The
rate.
equalized tax
The
rates.
the
It would be
149, so it would become 148, is that what you're
148.
saying?
It'd actually be 152, and then you take your incentive off of that,
Right.
So, but it would make it 148.
which would be 148.
And then how much does that affect, like, Williston as an example, instead of 161? with
Be
the
160.
CL, it would just
It's a
be
penny.
160.
The penny.
It's not going to make or
And
change
so,
a yes,
so,
no.
I'm sorry, so off of like a $500,000 house, how much would I save if a penny was off?
So it was, they gave this to us. Hold on, give me a minute. I think it's,
It's just so my mind can actually understand what we're talking
I
about.
think
Yeah,
what we
do
did
you
is
have
numbers.
penny on the tax rate translates to $20 on a $200,000. So why don't they just say $10 on $100,000? That makes it a lot
So
easier.
I'm sorry.
Because nobody has
how much was it?
$100,000.
So it's
$50.
And don't imagine your total tax bill, too.
Right.
Right.
My experience with conversations about fund balance, school, and the town, just listening to the town, questions in the community have been about what's the recommendation from the experts about how much to keep. And I think for the most part, people in the communities that I've been part of the conversations seem to accept that year to year it may change based on the current conditions, the current situation. So I understand the long-range plan, but I think for the most part, most people in the community, they're hearing about fund balances in their town budgets. They're asking about why did the select board come up with this particular number to apply to revenue. In this, I would think that they'd expect the same thing of our larger school district. What's your process for making a decision about how much to apply to the fund balance? And maybe it is part of that step-down piece.
Yeah, my concern taking 750 out right now is it just gets us closer to, it's, you know, we've only been consolidated for a few years now, and we're still learning things, we're still figuring out what we need and what we don't need. So taking out that 500 versus 750 will give us one more year of some type of support from a fund balance. And for me, if it was 10 cents, I'd say absolutely, let's do it. You know, because that's what I think the voters would want, but it's a penny. It's $10 per $100,000, I guess.
I don't know. I think 8 cents is a
Well, it's
huge
more like
leap,
half.
so.
The 400 is, this is, you're only talking 2.
Right.
So
Right.
half a penny.
Half a penny.
No, and we're looking at leaving St. George out of it because their increase was so much. The increase in the tax rate ranges from 5.2% in Williston to 5.9% in Shelburne. And so if we're able to drop that down, you know, perhaps we could get a couple of the towns at least below a 5% increase in their tax rate. You know, Penny might do that to Williston, Charlotte, and Heinsberg are 5.4 and 5.5% increases. So, you know, knocking them, you know, psychologically in terms of what a voter's going to think about.
What page are you
How
on?
much are my taxes going up?
Are you looking at a?
I think Russ did the
I
math.
did the math
I did the
Oh.
math- I did the math on what the CLA applied tax rates are for each town from fiscal year 20 and fiscal year 21.
Do you mind sharing?
No, it's 5.4% for Charlotte, 5.5% for Heinsberg, 5.9% for Shelburne, 9% for St. George, and 5.2% for Williston. Those are how much our taxes, you know, or the tax rate would go up on this chart on the last page here. So, you know, like I say, with the exception of St. George and possibly Shelburne, I think that it would be nice if we could find a way in terms of voter perception and trying to get people to vote yes, if it were at least below 5% tax increase. And I know some of the towns, again, Shelburne included, are looking at, you know, on the town side, are looking at some pretty sizable tax increases as well.
I know Charlotte's looking at a 2-cent tax increase on their town budget.
So, and on the other hand of that, I feel that if we take the 750 now, and if our budget gets voted down to 750, then we're cutting programs. Where if our budget gets voted down at the 500, we could apply the 250 from the fund balance, so it's kind of an ace in our pocket.
I can tell you if our budget gets voted down, $250
Ain't
reduction
gonna
isn't going to make
But it's
make the
a
difference.
start, it's a contribution.
You're still going to be cutting.
But they're voting
stuff.
on the budget. The fund balance is revenue. They're two different things. The fund balance is revenue, and the budget is the budget. If the budget fails, then we've got to go back and do something with the budget.
Jocelyn?
Just going off of, I think it's kind of building off of what Brendan was talking about. I get nervous about taking $750,000 out of the fund balance, also thinking about the fact that next year our incentive is only going to go down to 2 cents. So, I mean, our incentive is going down, and I'm cautious, I guess, to also be taking down our fund balance maybe a little bit faster than we had thought that we were going to do, just because like next year, only 2 cents, we're only gonna get the incentive of 2 cents rather than last year only got 6 cents and now we're at 4 cents. Like that, I mean, that's also going into the tax rate, is that like if we were still at 4 cents for next year, that would have been $100 off of a $500,000 house. That wouldn't be there, so I don't know.
We're robbing the present to pay, or robbing the future to pay the present if we take out more money. And I can see into the future with my crystal ball. Health insurance costs are going to increase. Salaries are going to increase. In fact, everything is probably going to increase. Plus, as Jocelyn so cleverly pointed out, we're going to be losing that 2 cents incentive. And at some point, we're going to have to pay for it. And I'd rather, our budget is up, what, 4.6%? I think our taxes ought to go up to reflect that we have spent more money.
They have, or they will.
Yeah.
And they will.
Angela?
Calling on myself. Looking at the revenue summary and the interest earned, 225, 275, is the fund balance invested? What is the interest earned off of?
This interest is on the TAN borrowing. Remember I said we'd like, it's a cash flow thing that the property tax revenues don't come in evenly through the year, so we have to borrow money to pay payroll until the taxes come in. So we borrow about $6 million on July 1st to deal with the cash flow, but on July 2nd, we have $6 million invested, right?
So maybe it's two separate, is the fund balance invested?
It's in
I
a,
don't even know if that is.
yes, it's in the bank. It's in a treasury fund.
As somebody who works for
Money
a
market.
bank, I can tell you it's focus.
Is that, why?
Because interest rates are very low. And
But I mean, why is it invested in a low yield situation? Because it's just
because it
safer?
needs to be invested in some sort of a risk-free investment. We're not going to put it in the stock market.
That we have access to.
And hope. It's going to be in a risk-free investment, and right now, those are, they are paying very low interest rates. And they, the Fed decreased interest rates 3 times last year. Expect them to possibly do it again this quarter, maybe not. But you're not going to see interest rates climbing anytime soon. So it's, there's no investment argument to be made for holding on to a fund balance. We're effectively losing money on it to inflation. So it's not there's no argument that says, well, hey, we're earning 5% on it, because we're not. We're earning probably less than 1.
Yeah, I think, Laura, that I should have, you probably understand it better than I do, but she's, because it's a package deal, the bank does this $6 million package deal with us, and so we probably get better than we do on the rest of the fund balance, but it's in something, it has to be, by statute, it has to be something very risk averse.
It also has to be liquid because of oil or something,
I was just wondering if the cost of money was a factor at all in this decision.
I think when we initially came up with that model, we weren't looking at budget increases as much as we are now. We adjusted how we calculated that model. I don't think that we adjusted the revenue or the fund balance application to it. So I guess I'm not as wed to that. I feel like one of our board budget goals is that we were going to provide the best education possible at a price the community can afford, and I haven't felt
Is willing to pay for.
well. I would like to do a little consideration of our community that is going to be looking at 5.6% tax increases on school taxes alone. I think a gesture, if it's not going to cause irreparable harm, which we have unexpected increase in our fund balance, I don't think that it harms us to use that
I
money.
think if you look at the history of our fund balance, whether consolidated or not consolidated, we're always chipping away at it. And Jean, correct me if I'm wrong, we've never gotten down to the level where, the auditors say, okay, stop spending fund balance, you're at the limit of where it's prudent to be. So, chances are the $500,000 that has been committed this year isn't all gonna get spent. And the $500,000 that we commit next year isn't all going to get spent. I think historically, they've done such a good job managing expenses and managing the budget, that we've not, we say we're on this glide path to get to $1 million if we spend $1.5 million, or if we spend $500,000 each year for the next 3 years. I would be willing to, bet lunch, bet whatever, that 3 years from now, if we spend $500,000 every year out of the fund balance, that we'll still have $2 to $2.5 to $3 million in the fund balance. So that I think that there's very limited risk of bumping up that 500,000 to whatever number you want it to be, 750, give or take. I don't think we imperil ourselves from a fund balance standpoint or from a tax rate standpoint 2 to 3 years out, that suddenly we're going to have spent everything that it's prudent to spend from the fund balance.
We have no, looking at an email Gene sent me today, the plan is to draw down the fund balance over a certain period of time, whether it be 3 years or 4 years, however we look at it, or 5 years. But when you look at it, there's no, and I agree with you 100%, Russ, that every year we don't spend the entire fund balance.
I'm working really hard at it this year, though.
But there's no plan to replace that. The plan is to spend it. And if we're gonna increase it this year, you know, Jocelyn made a very good point, where, you know, our incentives is getting less and less year after year. You know, we're kicking the can down the road. You know, this year we might have a 5.6% increase, and then if we take out, you know, 750 versus 500, we might have a 5.1 or whatever. But then what year, fiscal 23, fiscal 24, we're dealing with 6%? I don't know. That's why I guess for me, I'm just not comfortable kicking the can down the road for a few years. And that's what I feel like we're trying to do, just to protect us this year.
Colleen?
I'm just wondering if we're making this far more complicated than it needs to be. I mean, the fund balance is money that we've already collected, and our auditors have a recommendation for an amount to keep aside in case we need it for some emergency. And so the differential, whatever that is, we make a prudent decision to apply that to offset taxes, you know, apply it as revenue. I just wondering, you know, if this were a community meeting, somebody would probably stand up in the community and say, you know, I would, oh, wait a minute, this is a community. I think I'll make a motion to make a recommendation to apply $750 based on what Jean has told us about the auditors, to apply $750 of our fund balance to offset revenue as revenue for the next year's spending in our budget.
So I second that.
Let's keep discussing.
You know, we could have a principle that says, well, we should spend all of it above what is recommended. That, you know, why are we holding on to $1.5 million in excess funds? And, you know, we'll see what happens next year. You know, maybe, you know, the tax rate will jump up because we spent $1.5 million all in 1 year. You know, we're kind of, you know, I don't know, using voter, you know, trying to interpret voter psychology on you know, some of these things, and we're trying to hit a lot of moving targets, what, you know, in terms of what the tax increase is going to be down, you know, down the road, and whether it's going to be 2 cents, 3 cents, whatever. You know, I guess I'm in favor of spending more of it rather than less, and not being terribly concerned about what it's going to look like 3 years from now or 4 years from now, because the numbers will all have changed at that point, and trying to predict what they are now is too difficult, and we're just holding on to taxpayer money.
Our two biggest expenses is benefits and salary. We know they're gonna consistently increase every year, and we know that if we hit a ledge, because we apply too much of this, just like you said, let's apply 1.5 million right now, then next year, I don't see that we're going to have a tax rate, anything that would be acceptable, let alone with community with this board.
Well, and then maybe we'll have to face that grim reality and make adjustments accordingly.
And there's a little bit of a fallacy. I mean, we do have control over benefits and salaries because we control how many people we hire. That's how we control that piece.
Yep,
And we have made a conscious decision this year not to, we've had a huge increase in healthcare. We've added staff, right? So we haven't controlled it that way. I think this is one way that we can, in whatever small way, give our taxpayers some of their money back while still getting the educational benefit that we think our kids deserve.
It's applying as revenue money that we've already collected.
Exactly.
You know, equating it to how we're spending our budget, it's a completely different issue. It's revenue, we've already collected the money, let's apply it to offset our taxes for next year.
Yeah, and we had this plan to get it down. We collected too much money, so let's change our tack and keep on the motion to keep the fund balance down by increasing it as Colleen proposed and you proposed, and Colleen made it as a motion.
And our fund balance is what it is because we're a new organization and we had collectively put all of our, we've moved to a different place. And now, as we know about a merged system, a larger system can adapt to change more readily than a smaller system can. We kept our fund balances higher in aggregate with the smaller districts because of those risks, but with a larger district, if something happens in Shelburne and Shelburne needs a new boiler, the whole team is supporting that. It's not, a larger district can absorb fluctuation much more easily, so we can draw down the fund balance.
So do we want to call the motion?
And
or-
can I ask a question?
I want to make sure everyone has a chance.
The-
And then we can, go ahead, Jeff.
So the fund balance is at 2.5 million right now. Is that a static amount that will not fluctuate at all? In other words, as we draw down from that, will we always be drawing down just from that amount of money? Or might that total amount of the fund balance depending upon what we spend this year, could that figure change? So we might be looking at another figure next year.
Yeah.
Right? Because as I hear this conversation, it sounds like we're talking about absolute numbers, but these numbers aren't necessarily
Right.
absolute. And I think that's important in our
We need to separate
consideration.
the revenue from the budget. The concern about the 2 cent in the drawdown, what I heard with our increases in budget this year is a lot of it was right-sizing the ship. That we had, for example, with CVU, we had reduced staffing too low and we're putting it back. We're not going to add an additional 2 more people next year necessarily. We may hear of things that we need to do, but by right-sizing the ship, our staffing should be at a place that's fairly stable, and we should not be seeing those increases necessarily in staffing unless something interesting comes up next year.
But we're not decreasing staffing next year.
Well, we may. We don't know how the community's going to respond to our
We
budget
could
proposal.
stop teaching math and science at CVU.
Yeah,
Reduce
good
all-
luck
And,
with that.
and Colleen, I appreciate that you were bringing up that, that part of the increase in staff was right sizing, because where my head keeps going is we're still a fairly new consolidated district. And although we are right sizing the ship in some aspects this year, we don't know, maybe next year, Elaine and her team are gonna come to us and say, we thought we had this covered, we thought we had that covered. And there's a very good chance that there may be other staff that we've realized, like, they were cut from before we consolidated, or this new need has come up because this, new kids have moved in and they need
Right,
this or whatnot.
right.
And so again,
But that has nothing to do with the fund balance. The fund balance is money that's already been collected.
It does have something to do
it does
with.
It has
though.
nothing to do with the fund
It
balance.
does. Going back to kicking the can down, I respect what we do in our district, and I feel like when I'm in the finance committee meetings, or even when we're talking here, I feel like we're very good at being conservative, and I know one could argue so we should be more conservative about our rate, but I really get nervous and hesitate with the fact that we're going to be stepping down eventually to being that there's no incentive in 2 years, and that I understand that this is revenue that's already been collected, but we're still only talking about increasing $250,000, so we're still going to say to the teaching staff, you need to come up with another $150,000 so that we can take the 1 cent off. So if we're talking about adding $250,000 from the fund balance, why aren't we talking about adding 1.5 million?
We could.
Well, I would then say, please, because then we have to stop and think about this. Because what happens, when you're talking about 500 or 750, I'm sitting here going, this is a board decision, and I don't need to get involved in the conversation at all. But if you're talking about $1 million, now I really care, because even though you're right, there's the budget side and there's the revenue side, just like the step down of 2 cents that we're gonna be eating next year, and we're gonna figure out how to get what we already have without increasing, knowing that we've got this 2 cents that we've gotta make up. The $1 million is exactly the same thing, except it's a way lot more than 2 cents. Because it's the same whole. You've impacted the tax rate in an artificial way. So at $750, because you could probably put $750 next year. And we do know, we are very good about being conservative about how we spend our money. So it's unlikely that we won't have some money to spend. So that fund balance likely will go up a little bit compared to whatever it is at the end after you decide what you're gonna take. But I would just say 500, 250 to 750, 500 to 750 is the right number to be thinking about. Beyond that, the hole is too deep for us.
Yeah, I think the million was just an exaggerating on a point.
Well, because
but
I'm
it was-
just, right, I don't think that we.
No, I don't think
that we
anyone
should be
here.
putting
Right.
$1 million or 1.5 million, but it's just,
We're still within the boundaries of what our auditors are recommending, correct?
And,
That's the bottom line.
750, 500, 250, 0 way of eating up the balance is that 250 a year is within the realm of something we can deal with in the budget. Anything bigger than, a step bigger than that would be
Right.
really.
So can we call a question now?
Go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to ask everyone to take a mental picture of this conversation, because as I'm sitting here, I'm thinking, this is a really good reason to have more specific board budget goals, so that when we're talking about how to spend, and I recognize that it's revenue, it's already taken it, I'm just thinking, maybe in a few years, we'll need some money from this fund to pay for something that's been lost to a grant.
The fund balance cannot be used for just spending on whatever.
It's
for
revenue.
emergency, it's money that's been collected, it sits aside, it's not money to be creative with at all.
Well, this is a creative way, I think. This is being creative in a sense.
People do think of it, basically, you have a fund balance because you have overtaxed your community.
Your community. So it's the community's money that we're returning it to the community in an attempt to.
We're applying it to the next year's.
Right.
That's
Well,
how,
we've
that's
always
how we
been
return.
Is there
it.
an-
A statement stands.
Okay. Is there anyone else who has something new to add to the conversation or hasn't been said before? Because technically I'll call the question. That was not up for debate. You're supposed to call the question, right?
Okay, I call a question.
Well, I was just clarifying that. I
Okay.
was just trying to be polite and asked if anybody else
All
had
right, all right.
anything else.
Well, there was enough time. I thought there was enough delay and no one was.
Okay, so
Raise
we're
your
going to
hands.
take a vote on Colleen's motion to increase the fund balance from 500 to 750, correct?
Correct.
The contribution from the fund balance.
Contribution from the fund balance, thank you. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? All right, can you just raise your hands, because I'm hard of hearing. For those who are in favor, could you raise your hands? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Those opposed? 2, 3, 3. So the motion passes. So we'll apply 250 from the fund balance.
750.
So- I'm sorry,
In addition.
750.
Doing the same thing.
We're not going the other way,
differential.
yeah,
And then
exactly.
how does it work if we're trying to go down by a penny? So now we're gonna tell the administration that they need to find $150,000?
Instead of half a penny, 250 would be like half a penny.
250 is half a penny, 400 is a full penny. So if we want to take a full penny off, it would be to ask the administration to do a go-get, which takes several forms. It could be they find $150,000 to cut from the budget. They basically have 2 years, well, not 2 years, a year to find the money. It could be underspending in the already approved
Wait a
budget.
minute, we're coming up with a budget number that's gonna go to the community. We're not, right?
I thought Russ did his calculations of how we were just talking about how it'd be nice to be under 5% for most communities, and I thought that Russ did it off of a penny.
I did.
Right,
So
which would involve
So
a
even though we just
150.
passed this, that doesn't mean that we're now at a budget number that we could go to the community and say you're gonna be under 5%.
Right, but we're voting on a budget, so the go-get would
Would
be
have to come off of
pulling
that
out of the budget now. It's not what they're gonna think about doing over the next 6 months.
Right.
It's now.
Right, what she's saying is that we would have 6 months to figure out, because we're not spending any money until July 1. we would have until July 1 to figure out, okay, how we're gonna do this, and somebody else might retire. We might get more money in grants, we
Just
might.
remember that salary and benefits are estimates.
Right.
And the risk that I know that I'm carrying in next year's budget is I still have the HRA at 60% utilization, and it's running closer to 62, 63.
Okay.
So that's a few hundred, but that's just a risk I have in the budget already.
Dave?
Fuel costs may go up, whatever.
And fuel costs I've assumed flat, which is always a risk given the political situation now, so I am carrying risk in next year's budget, which is, I thought was appropriate to get to the 3.9% we were looking at for a while, so we leaned in pretty heavy to get to something that was below 4% on the equalized pupil count, but there is risk in the spending already. Who knows, it's 18 months to get there, we could figure it out if we had to, but.
Just for my own clarification, so we're taking $750,000 out of the general fund.
Out of the fund balance.
Out of the fund balance, sorry. And we're asking the administration to go find $150,000 to get us below the 5%.
Did we vote on that?
That would be a separate vote.
That's a separate-
Nobody
We're not there
has
yet.
made a motion yet that we adopt a budget of a certain size, I don't believe.
No.
Well, I believe that the conversation was around the fund balance was to get the board, and maybe I'm just wrong, this is for my own clarification, to try to get the tax rates under 5%.
So what I was thinking was if we did all 400,000 out of fund balance, that then means that next year the administration is starting $400,000 in the hole, right?
We're conflating the fund balance
But
with
then,
the budget.
but we're starting them off at 250,000 in the hole.
I look at it as two different, really two different issues. And I think Lynn said, could we knock a penny off of the tax rate? And to do that, we need a combination of decreased spending and increased revenue of $400,000 to remove that penny. So we've now had a discussion, and her thought was, okay, well, let's get 250 of that from increased contribution from the fund balance. So we've had that conversation, it was moved, it was passed, so we're going to do that. The next question, and which I think is a separate, question, is, all right, do we want to get there to that penny? And if so, then we've got to have a budget that is 82,548, 769 minus $150,000, and where could that $150,000 come from?
Right.
Is it a go-get, or do we say you need to come back at our next budget meeting with a concrete proposal that says, here's where I'm getting $150,000 out of the budget, so that, we can then have, that penny decrease in the tax rate in 3 out of 5 towns with an increase less than 5%. That's kind of how I see the
That's how
conversation.
you read my mind.
And how we would need to get there if we all say, okay, yeah, we do want to get there. But I think that's the next part of the conversation.
I would just caution the board that our practice for the past 3 years of budget cycles has always been to say to the administration is to give them a number target, and they figure out the how. So I guess I would caution us not to go down the path of come back and tell us exactly where you're going to get that $150,000 from. That's kind of the sense of a go-get, or the understanding of a go-get.
Yep.
Well, for me, I also feel that we already given administration their target and mislaid the game. I don't know if it would be, the right thing to do to say, let's change the target, let's change the finish line.
I think that when we come up with that target initially, we have limited information about where the taxes are gonna be. I think that we're at a point now where we have more information about where the taxes are going to be. It's still not carved in stone because yield and things like that are still to come. But in terms of, the public outreach and the public relations phase that we would be going into once we adopt a budget, we have more information than we did when, we initially gave the administration targets that, we were asking them to reach. So I think, that does affect the conversation that we should be having. I'm not saying that we necessarily have to change it, but it does affect the conversation because we have better information than we did 2 or 3 months ago. And you know, one of the things that I struggle with personally, forget about as a board member is, and I think a lot of people do, well, your budget is going up X and my taxes are going up X plus Y. You know, why is that?
I think Russ has a good point about that psychological barrier of 5. You know, it is a number.
But is that how we report it?
That's how people will look at, that's how the community will look at it.
You're saying is that
I think you have to be prepared to
Oh, yeah.
answer a question in a, you know, community forum, or, you know, if the newspaper calls us, or in town meeting. Well, okay, that's what the budget's doing, what's happening to my taxes here in Williston, or, you know, whatever town.
I hear and I respect that, but I'm just thinking back to, I'm, you know, still relatively new to all of it. With the presentation that we did last year in Williston, like, I really think that it's a big part of it is how you also present it. So I'm just thinking, like, I don't know it as a taxpayer, I would be jumping to that I'm at 5.2%. How I would be looking at it is, okay, I can see that over time, like, we've been staying relatively flat. Like, I'm just thinking about, like, the visuals we're gonna be using and how we're gonna be presenting it, and, like, I don't know that I don't know if my brain would be going, oh, okay, I could have been 5.2%, but now I'm only at 4.9%. I don't.
Well, and I wonder,
Go ahead.
I just wonder if people are thinking in terms of percentages versus really wanting to know the actual dollar amount. I mean, when I think about visuals, as you've been bringing up, which I think is really helpful, Jocelyn, I think it would be useful, and I think this has been done before, to once we adopt our budget and are firm on that, and we go to the taxpayers, what does that mean in terms of, let's say, every $100,000 of appraised value on a property? How much in dollars? How many dollars extra am I going to be paying this year? Because I know what I'm paying now in taxes. So how much are my taxes going to go up next year if I vote yes on this budget? I mean, I think it's a very straightforward.
$80 per 100,000.
Well, I think it would be helpful to have that, you know.
And-
Well, or Jeff,
that
somebody
Yeah, depending on the
somebody
town.
could be thinking, I got a 2.5% raise this year, and my taxes are going up 5.5%. I think, you know, in the interest of transparency, full disclosure, you know, and you know, we would say, well, there's different types of learners in our schools. I think there's different types of learners in our communities, and we should be presenting, you know, visually with graphs, and we should be giving numbers for those people who think about numbers. You know, we need to try to be disclosing, not saying, okay, how, you know, let's do this, and I'm sure we want to do things in a way that are favorable and that are going to try to get the budget passed, but we also need to, you know, give people the information that they should have in order to make an informed decision on a budget vote.
And they do. Let me just put this in there, because last year, the only emails I got were from Williston, because Williston had the really wacky CLA. And the emails that I got were from people who wanted to know why their tax rate was going up higher than the other communities around them. So people are looking at their tax rate versus.
And Lynn, I totally agree with that, and I'm not saying that we should be trying to, like, hoodwink our constituents by any means. I'm just saying, though, that when you hear, like, my taxes are going up 5%, that can sound drastically different than my taxes are, we would be saving our taxpayers by taking a penny off $50 off of a $500,000 house. And I'm just using $500,000 because it's easier in my head to use, but say a $300,000 house, we're saving them $30. And maybe this is just the way that my brain works, but like $30 compared to like 5%, when that's just like, $30 seems manageable to me. And I'm saying that as knowing that I'm a middle-class family. Like, I'm not saying that would be true for everyone, but I do just think that there is, like, you have to present it several different ways so that people can like pick it the way that they hear it and they understand it. And I value that. But I think that comparison of the percentage is that they were literally looking, it would be like St. George right now, right? Like if St. George is looking at their list and they're going, why is everyone at 1.56 to 1.61 and now I'm at 1.70? But again, that percentage that they're looking at isn't the percentage of from between year to year. They were looking at in comparison in a chart.
That was one of the emails.
But I'm just saying.
I'll forward everyone the emails this year, so you all can enjoy them,
But and obviously, on the back page here, PCLA tax rate was 1.45 cents, or $1.45.
That was for last.
This year, it's $1.49. That's 4 cents. 4 cents divided by $1.45 works out to be 2.76%. So what I see here is that the taxes are going up at 2.76.
But we don't pay the pre-CLA tax rate. The pre-CLA tax rate then has the CLA applied to it, and then you end up with, for those people who are actually paying property taxes as opposed to income sensitive, that's the rate that, you know, is actually being applied against whatever your grand list numbers are. So the real tax rate is, and it varies by town, is that CLA applied rate. And that's why the CLA ends up being such a big deal, and why, you know, towns go back and fight it, which we would think St. George will
Hopefully
want to do
Or
this
get
year.
an assessment.
Colleen.
Yeah, and, you know, I really appreciate the points of different kinds of learners in the community. So 2 things, equalized tax rate, we need to remember that so that we can explain that to the community. And also, I confirmed with Brendan, our budget year to year is 4.6%. So when I would be talking with someone in the community, I'd focus on that 4.6% because that's what we can control. We cannot control the tax rate. We can control the budget year to year. Tax rate is dependent on CLA and.
Right.
Because we do have raising, if you have more students, it's gonna cost you more money. So the
Right.
3.8% is definitely a number within your control.
Like, it's a little more confusing, it's easier to simplify.
Well, I don't usually get into trying to explain equalized pupil counts, but
Yeah.
yes. the
But,
cost
yeah,
per
I mean,
pupil-
and that should be another table that we have. What's the equalized per pupil cost year to year? What's that increase?
Yeah.
I don't know. Do we have that?
Year to year?
3.8.
It's 3.8 this year.
Yeah.
At the risk of, I know Bob was very good at keeping his mouth shut, and I probably should be, but we're talking about $150,000 on an $85 million of spending. If it's important to the board to try to get under 5 and get to 4.94, by taking 150 as a go-get, I would definitely say you need to give us a go-get. There's just too many moving parts, and I don't think the board wants to get into having Elaine try to figure out in the next 48 hours, literally, since. Right.
I feel like the way we build a budget, I have to have a meeting with every principal group to say, okay, well, what have you got?
And the biggest part of our budget is just an estimate. Our salary and our health benefits are just an estimate. So, you know, at the risk of giving myself a lot more work, I think a go-get of 150 is not out of line if it makes the board be able to support it all together and not be a split board. It'd be some work, but yes, to Russ's point, I'm really good, but I can't land this budget within $150,000. So, you know, we'll just figure out how to be on the positive side. And the worst case is that that will be, if we can't do it for some reason, or oil prices go up, or, you know, the CLA number, the HRA number doesn't come down, that's why we have a fund balance. So it's not the end of the world, it's just the point of, I probably should be arguing the other direction in my current job, but I think that if it makes a united board to be able to stand behind the budget, if we take the other 150, I think I could speak for us that we figure it out as a go-get.
I mean, what that does is it satisfies all the concerns around the table.
I guess I don't really have a concern of getting a full 50, like, it goes back to, I think you might have said it, how do you present it, right? Is it $10, is it $5, you know, what is it? It's not, $150,000 out of a $80 million budget is not, it's wrong.
Bug dust is the term this board is familiar with.
Bug dust?
Bug dust. That was spot
I'm
on.
not sure I'd call $150,000
Yeah.
bug dust, but it's a lot of dust.
It's a lot of dust.
Big bugs.
I'd
Would
say it's a
someone like-
mound.
yeah.
It's a mound of dirt.
It's budget dust.
Yeah.
There you go.
Would someone like to make a motion to ask the administration to go get, for a $150,000 go get?
Well, I think it comes back to the point, Russ brought it up earlier, did anyone make a motion to, are we looking for a budget number?
No, that's
No.
next.
It'll be
We
in
don't
2
need
weeks.
to do that, do we? Make any kind of motion then?
Well, we probably
I
want to
think
know.
I think it would be helpful for the administration to know if
Oh,
that's
but-
the direction we're going.
It would be nice in 2 weeks not to be having this conversation,
We really can't, I mean.
right? So in 2 weeks, we're coming with the final numbers.
The warnings.
But
Right.
if we make a motion that says, well, we're putting a $150,000 go-get in the budget, then we're making a motion tonight to have a $82,498,769 budget tonight instead of 2 weeks from now, which,
Well, you'd
Are you
still have to
moving
do
that?
it in 2 weeks, right? Because then you have the warnings
Right.
that you're approving.
Right, I think what you're doing is directing the administration to take $150,000 out of the number that was presented tonight.
Yep.
For expense, right? And
Yep.
that's what we'll bring back in 2 weeks.
so moved.
I can't make my own motion.
He started it, sort of, kind of. Does anyone want to, do you want to make it more formalized?
Well,
Poor Bonnie's trying to take the notes over
Yeah,
here.
so if, you know, if we want to ask $150,000 to be knocked out of the budget, then what we're asking for is a proposed budget of $82,498,769.
So can I suggest, so at the end of last meeting, there was just sort of a straw poll that said, do you support the budget at the $150,000 higher number? We would just kind of ask that tonight we say is, and I don't have the number off the top of my head, that number, what everybody
But he's-
would support next week or 2 weeks from now.
Okay.
So there's not really, we're not at a motion stage.
It's 82,398. 82,398,769.
You're right, thank you, yeah, it's a good thing.
Thank you, Colleen.
I was just doing it in my head.
Sneak 100 in there.
Is there a general consensus for that among board members?
I would support it.
I supported
Everybody's okay with that, except for the chair of our finance committee?
You know, for me, it's really like at this point in the game, you know, I can see the 750, that was fine, that was a great conversation. And I'm fine with where that is. Right now, we got an $83 million budget, or $82 million budget, and we're asking to pull out $150,000 of that. That's just, to me, it's just kind of like, why?
I agree with Brendan.
Like,
I
it's
feel like
just,
we're
you
just
know,
making
if
it
we're
harder
gonna do this in a while,
on our
I guess
administration.
$150,000 isn't substantial.
I think I support it in either form, before or after another 150, but I do agree, I have to say agree with that sentiment, and that education budgeting is incredibly complex, and at whatever level we understand it, you know, the average voter, unfortunately, even less. And I think that trying to get into the game of guessing voter psychology over numbers and percents and dollars it's just our own, we're all just operating from our own bias and nothing more. We really
Correct.
don't have any data that we're going off on that other than gut. And so I'd go back also to what you said, Angela. If we're going to make budget changes, then let's make it based on priorities and educational reasons
And
in
this is
our
not-
gut
this is a
about what
conversation,
people are
yeah.
gonna think or feel about certain numbers.
This is simply, let's just pull out $150,000. There's
This
no
feels pretty.
data
it's
around
it's
why
enough
we're,
to-
why we're taking $150,000 out of the budget.
I fundamentally have a problem with a tax increase that's over 5%, and I realize that in my town, I'm probably going to be stuck with it unless we look for even more to come out of the budget, or, more to, come out of the fund balance. That's a big tax increase. And, that compounds every year. So, government bodies in this state don't seem to have a problem with spending people's money. And we're talking about a big nut. We're talking about over twice the rate of inflation. We're talking about quite a bit higher than what most people, at least, people who work for companies in this state are getting for annual increases. It's a big number, it's real. So I don't think we should, poo-poo it. I think we have to be sensitive to that. And we've been fortunate for the last 10 years that the economy has been reasonably strong in Chittenden County. That's not always going to be the case. So, I don't think that we can just say, well, big deal, what's 5+%. I think we should be sensitive to that, more so than we have been.
It's what it's number one, all these things that we want for our kids at a price that our community can support. So, yeah, it would be great if we had a 0% tax increase this year, but that doesn't allow us to achieve the goals that we want to achieve. But we can't just ignore the community. And I'm with Russ. I don't know, Jeff. I guess I still have PTSD from a budget failing twice in Charlotte, 3 times eventually. And you would think maybe that's a community, what's a big deal? 5% increase. Well, it's a big deal. So I think a penny on the tax rate is a reasonable thing for the board to do. I don't think that taking $150,000 out, it's a lot to ask, and I appreciate the work and admire the work that the administration has done and how tightly they have kept this budgeting process, and the work that has gone into this, I can't even imagine. So asking them to come up with $150,000 is not an easy ask, but I feel like we need to do it. I'm sorry.
I guess I just wanted to respond and totally respect and understand what you're saying, but, and it's not that I capriciously think we could just spend whatever and don't have a respect for 5% being a high number. I think what we're talking about now is such a tiny difference that it's about psychology and not about a real difference in numbers. We're not talking about going from 5 down to 2. We're talking about, tenths of percents. And to the second point, yes, spending is high, and one of the challenges we have in this state, we're lucky we're in a large, fairly suburban district, but the challenge of living in a very small rural state is we don't have a lot of taxpayers to fund the systems and the things we have here, and so we are one cog in that wheel, but we're in a pretty fortunate position as a district relative to where a lot of towns are. So I guess I want to remind myself and our voters of that as well, because as expensive as it is, we have fairly flat enrollment. We have fairly flat tax rates. That is not the case in a lot of places, and we're fortunate, and hopefully we're doing things educationally that will help us grow and keep us to be growing communities, because that's what's going to impact these budgets down the line.
Okay, so I'm hearing we're okay with the go-get.
We have a motion?
Well, we decided we decided we were kind of going to follow what we did with last December.
You're advising on a budget number, which will be
Okay.
voted on next time. I think that's the right course.
And I'm sensing that everyone in general is okay with that. Go-get.
I know I'm in the minority, but I think I don't agree with it, but I know that I'm in the minority, so that is, I guess.
We value all voices, and I think you made some very good points.
New York's excellent.
I mean, I just think that for next year, I think then we need to figure out a different way of how we are, what number we're giving the administration, because exactly to Lynn, what you were saying, you know, how much work and how much time and how much effort goes into it. And just, you know, I don't want to be a dead horse, but Brendan's point, like $150,000 on a $80+ million budget, it just feels, it doesn't feel right, I guess. It just feels counterproductive to what we've all been doing for the last year, because the budgeting process is a year-long cycle, so I don't know.
I think, I hear you. I think it's counterproductive to one huge part of the process, but then there is the other part of the process where we have to actually ask people to.
Oh, no, I agree, but I don't know what the answer is, but if we know that we don't want to be going over 5% increase from year to year, or maybe it's 3% increase from year to year, because I know that the number was different last year, but we never really talked about, last year the center of our conversation was not about what the increase is from last year to this year with regards to what our tax rate was. Like, we were focusing more on the CLA numbers and the chart, really, the chart of how we got to here. That was like the chart that we were really focusing on in our conversations. And so I just think it would be, and I know that we've talked about this, but I think it just has to be clearer then what is our goal? Where do we need the number to be? How do we need to have it develop the way that we want it to? So that way we're not having to spend, I don't know, even over an hour conversation about $150,000.
Well, I do, just to be clear though, I got CLAs a week ago.
I
So
know,
there's
I
no
know.
way that we could have targeted with the CLAs, so that's, I get the yield, budget's pretty much done December 1st, the CLAs I get January 1st, so there's no way, you really, the board, I agree we could have a discussion more about how the targeting process works and how we want it to work going forward, but it's never gonna solve the problem of if the CLAs are through the roof, which is all about your property values going up, which is a good thing, but that you're never gonna be able to target, because we won't know until the last minute, and as long as I was on the board's always kind of struggled with this when the CLAs were unfavorable.
It's common. The last 2 years actually were not super typical,
Right.
in terms of budgeting. This is a much more typical conversation that boards have when you have to take the tax implication into account. It was easy last year because the taxes were flat. But not to prolong this, because somebody said they had to be home by 8. I'm gonna say to the administration, I think they've heard where the board would like them to go for next week. 2 weeks from now, when we do the final. And we'll have the bond, in 2 weeks, we'll have the final number, we'll have the presentation. Remember, we have a bond, a couple bonds that we're gonna be asking for. We'll be getting information on that, but we'll be voting on all these final figures.
We haven't talked about the bonds at all, so I'm assuming that's not set in stone, that it's going to be an article at this point.
It's gonna be an article which the board can support or not support.
And there'll be a presentation in 2 weeks at that meeting on the bond. And if anybody, I did bring it, I went in my box. This is why my husband didn't want me to run for board again. I found the feasibility study from 2007 for Charlotte Central School. If anyone wants to know what still hasn't been, Greg Marino remembers as well.
I'd like to read that.
Would you like to read that? It is. I pulled that out.
You have it right by your bedside,
I
right?
did, when I can't sleep at night. Okay, anything else on the budget? I'm going to move to 5.0, our action item.
No, you have a budget flyer.
Oh, I'm sorry, 4.2 budget flyer, that's kind of very important. Sorry, Bonnie.
It is important, and I've been not only taking notes on the meeting, but taking notes on everything people were saying about things we need to communicate to the community about this budget. So I have copies of our last year's flyer and just wanted to reassure you that I'm already deep into developing this year's, but now there are changes to make based on tonight's conversations. But we will continue to do a mix of different charts, different tables to appeal to all the different types of learners in our communities. And as it gets further along and
more finished looking, I will share it with all of you for input and feedback, and hopefully you can make sure we don't have 562 buses.
Only if you're elected.
Yeah, but that's in development. In addition to that, I've also started working on the budget presentations that I'll then give to each of you to share with your communities with a lot of the charts and things that you saw tonight, but also some other information like enrollment and assessment data and things like that. So that is all underway. I do have, again, for you all, this is the spreadsheet that I have shared with you electronically. I'll pass this around. Please, it's time to take charge of when we're going to do these presentations.
I never, so can you send that again?
I will send it again electronically. I'll share this with you right now.
And please try and fill it out by Friday.
Yeah, I apologize.
There might be some problems with the Google Mail in the
Okay.
district.
Huh, okay, well, I will check on that, but I'll also resend it.
Yeah, I had
Okay.
problems today too.
Huh.
In
I
the
still know,
link
there was something you said you sent us that I never got, and I don't think I got it again.
Do we need to figure out the 2020 dates? Is that the?
Yes. So we already know that actually next week, Dave is starting and doing a presentation to the Shelburne Select Board, which is going to be interesting given tonight's discussion. So that's the first one that I know is happening, but the more that we get these scheduled, the more I can make sure I have materials ready for you.
How can we verify that we're getting the emails going in and out? Because this is like one of 3 emails that have been problematic. And I,
Well, so, was this attached with the other budget was it the budget communications email you sent on December 18th?
oh, I could probably just need a reminder.
Yeah, but I'll resend this tomorrow as well.
Okay. 5.0, action matters. 5.1, do I have a motion
Wait,
to?
I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay.
Should I just look back at the email to know what you need input from us about on this, like when we're gonna do?
So we'll just
Sign
fill it out,
Board
saying if
members
you can go.
actually set up when
The presentations are going to happen with, let's say, either their select board or their PTO or PIE or FAP, and then add that date to this calendar on there so that I can have materials ready for you.
as well as the presentations on copy.
Do you have the times for these meetings?
We have the dates for the meetings.
And I need you all to
Figure it out.
Don't worry, Wilson, I've got FAP covered. Already be there.
So you need us to commit to a date
and set up the date.
We have to
Yes.
find the dates.
and set up the date.
I'll do some meeting with some.
Okay, any other questions? All right, we'll try this the third time. It's a charm. 5.0, action matters. Do I have a motion to approve the copier purchase as recommended? Why is the computer working now? Thank you.
Second.
Questions?
So I was wondering, when the last time was that this was, that the lease versus buy option was looked into, and if it's, I know it's common practice, I was just wondering.
Yeah, we look at it we look at it every time it comes up to make sure it still makes sense. It's about a 5-year payback, so it's about equal to when you want to replace some of these high-use copiers anyway. And this way we keep the cash flow nice and steady in the budget as opposed to, I mean, these ones you're looking at right now would cost $50,000, and I don't have $50,000 right now in the budget to do this. So this way it just keeps it even. So, but we do look at it every time. We ask for both when we bid these out.
Any other questions? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Any opposed? Okay. 6.0, next meeting dates. This is really important. Our next meeting date is Monday morning at 7:30 in the CVU library. We have our legislative breakfast, and I think I'm hoping it'll be a good turnout, because I think there's some really good issues
And
to
it's election
discuss.
year.
And it's an election year, so they'll want to come meet with us.
And one of our reps is running for governor, apparently.
Oh,
David Zuckerman, did you see that
Oh,
today?
I did see that.
He's a lieutenant governor.
He's gonna back out?
Who backed up? It was reported, and then he said, I'm not making any decisions till spring.
Ah,
Oh,
BT Digger jumped the gun.
interesting. Okay, so please try and attend that for if you can't get there at 7:30, I mean, we usually do go right till 9:30, so come if you can.
I think 9 is what we try to.
9, sorry, it says 9:30 here.
Where is that?
It's
I
usually
suppose
till
it's
9.
in the library.
It's in
It's in the library classroom. So you go into the library, take a quick left.
Or just walk in and look lost, and they'll point you.
And they'll tell you where to go.
They'll think she's a kid and they'll say, oh, Miss
Can I help you with a book?
Yeah.
We'll see, 2 weeks, we'll have our final budget meeting on the 21st. Committee meetings will start up again February 4th. And the retreat, put this in your calendar, the CVSD retreat, mid-year retreat is February 18th, which is our normal meeting time, but it's gonna be at 5 o'clock instead of 6 o'clock, and I think.
And it's at CVSD.
CVSD in Shelburne.
We will welcome you to our humble abode.
Are we cooking?
No, we'll have somebody.
And Lynn, is there an agenda developed for the retreat?
We're working on it.
And will we have input into that agenda?
No, absolutely not. This is an
It's an autocratic
Yeah.
decision.
Yes, if you have ideas that you would like to put in for this retreat versus the retreat in June,
May or June, whatever
yeah,
it is, yep.
let me know. Okay. If there's nothing else, do I have a motion to adjourn? Second? All right.
I say
we are
nobody
adjourned.
wants to leave.
I know.